So let's try to set the framework here a little bit for the Colts defense as we head into the offseason, because I did not quite see what a lot of you saw out of this defense this year, or at least what you guys let on that you saw. Because from what I've gathered, a lot of you saw a trash defense out there for the Indianapolis Colts. That is not what I saw. I did not see a trash defense. I saw a defense, actually, that had some very good moments. Now, of course, they had some down moments as well, but there were a number of games where I thought the defense performed really well. Now, with that being said, they are like a bit of an enigma, a mystery, right? And what I'm about to say to you is actually going to sound like a riddle, but this is kind of my opinion on the Colts defense. If I were to sum it up into one statement, I promise I'm trying to say this in as plain of English as possible, but it may be a little bit of a tongue twister. To me, it is clear that the Colts defense needs to improve, but it's not exactly clear what they need to improve. Does that make any sense? I'm trying. If that doesn't make sense to you, I'm sorry. I'll try to paint the picture throughout the course of the episode, right? And for all the talk about how bad this defense was, I want to read some stats for you. Well, hold on. Got to put on the glasses when we talk about the stats around here. The stats are for the nerds. I'm not a big stats guy, but these are going to surprise you, okay? Because the horrific, terrible Gus Bradley-led Colts defense, okay? 5th in sacks in the NFL. Tied for 10th in third down defense. Tied for 10th in yards per carry allowed. 16th in pass yards allowed per game, which is right in the middle of the pack, literally dead center. 14th in opposing QBR against this defense, middle of the pack. Now 24th against the run. 24th in total yards allowed per game, and 28th in points per game. So tell me this. How can it be that you are in the top 5 in sacks, the top 10 in third down defense, the top 10 in yards per carry allowed, and kind of a middle of the pack passing defense, statistically speaking, but still allow more points than all but 4 teams in the NFL, right? Because some of the things that people are talking about improving are the pass rush and the secondary. And when you boil down what a defense needs to do, it really comes down to 4 things. Now, sure, this is somewhat of a reduction of the entire thing. I'm not talking schematically. I'm just talking from like a generalization standpoint, right? A defense needs to rush the passer, defend the passes, stop the run, and stop the other team from scoring. Those are the 4 things a defense needs to do. If you can stop all 4 of them, if you can do all 4 of those things, you have a top-tier defense in this league, okay? But again, we talk about the pass rush and the secondary. Those 4 things I just said, the 2 we are discussing are number 1 and number 2 on the list of those 4 things that we did well, statistically speaking. Our best defense was passing yards per game and sacks. But we're talking about the pass rush and the secondary. So really the issue was we didn't do great against the run and we couldn't stop teams from scoring. Now, why isn't that the conversation that we're having? Why is it the one we're having and not that, which is the truth, right? Why haven't we shifted the conversation towards how do we consistently stop the run and how do we improve the other team to stop the other team from scoring? I fucked up. Well, I think really there's 2 reasons. One's the elephant in the room, and I understand. We were missing Grover Stewart for 6 games, so those numbers are a little bit skewed, all right? Cat's out of the bag, okay? I believe, this is off the top of my head, when Grover, before he got suspended for those 6 games, we were allowing, 102 rushing yards per game before he went down. That would have also had us in the top 10 in the league against the run, okay? But when he was out, the Colts were allowing nearly 150 yards per game on the ground, which would have been the worst in football had that been the pace the entire season. So Grover Stewart, by himself, in theory, is the difference between the Colts being a top 10 run defense and being the worst run defense in all of the NFL. So, for starters, this is kind of a digression. Despite me considering the idea of the Colts letting go of Grover Stewart this offseason, let me make my stance abundantly clear right now. If you are Chris Ballard, you do everything in your power, which it sounds like he's going to do, to make sure that Grover Stewart is on this team next season, right? Don't listen to Justin. He's an idiot. But back to the regularly scheduled programming, okay? Number two, in terms of really the main reason why I think this isn't the conversation that we're having, which is it's not as simple of a conversation to have, right? Perhaps you actually might have to have a layered understanding of how the game of football works to really figure out what was going on here with the Indianapolis Colts defense. Because as I just told you, and again, this goes in line with what I saw. I wouldn't be referencing numbers if it wasn't what I saw. This wasn't a team that just didn't have a pass rush, and it wasn't a team that just could not defend opposing quarterbacks at all, okay? It was a defense that really played well often, right? Now, I'm not saying that I have all the answers, okay? There are plenty of people in the world that have forgotten more about the game of football than I will ever know, and I am the first one to admit that. But I do take pride in what I do know about the game of football. And lucky for you, we don't do the simplified conversations around here. It's not what we do, okay? I'm all about moving the conversation forward, all right? Being objective, removing as much of the emotion as possible while understanding we're all victims of our emotions, okay? And then trying to just be an overall more educated fan base. One of the things I've always felt in Colts media, and there's plenty of people doing great stuff. I don't say this to put anyone down, but I do feel that sometimes the fans, perhaps a little irrational, perhaps a little emotional. Now, of course, these are all fans. These are just not fans of the Colts. You go to any team, you find these people. But I want to have a net positive impact on the discussion and the dialogue that surrounds this team. So we're going to try to figure out today exactly how the Colts have to improve this defense, how they can do it. And actually, there's going to be one stat in here which explains the entire thing, right? All of the improvements that the Colts need to make can be boiled down to one statistic. I'm going to tell you what that statistic is in the body of the episode. Of course, I'm going to make you wait for it. But before we get into it, got to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride on the Bench Colts podcast. As always, I ask anyone who's watching on YouTube, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. If you're listening to audio version, maybe shoot a 5-star review. Let the people know how much you're enjoying me talk about this team. Subscribe if you're part of the YouTube channel. If you keep coming back, we're over 2,000. We're shooting for 3,000. You know the bit I give, 5,000, 10,000, a billion. Colts fans on Mars, right? That's what we're looking for over here. I want the entire world to be Colts fans. I want every stadium to be empty and Lucas Oil to be packed to the brim and people tailgating in the parking lot. That's what I want it to be, okay? But without further ado, let's get back into the episode. Housekeeping out of the way, and I want to start with Gus Bradley because I do feel he's been the latest scapegoat for the fans of the Indianapolis Colts. Now, listen, this is what fan bases do, okay? So I don't blame you, right? First, it was Frank Reich. Then it was Chris Ballard. Now he had a good offseason. We moved off of him, and now we're on to Gus Bradley, okay? There's always got to be a fall guy when things don't go our way. That is the nature of life. That's how there's accountability, right? That's how it works. It doesn't always mean it's placed in the right spot, but there is always going to be someone you blame when things go bad because if there was no one to blame, things would go good. So this I understand, okay? Now, what I'm not going to do is sit here and say that Gus Bradley runs the perfect scheme, okay? Of course, I would like to see them mix up the formations. They're running on defense a bit more, a little more stunts on the defensive line, right? Perhaps some man blitz type concepts. We're on the same page as far as what we would like to see more out of from Gus Bradley. But also, when Gus Bradley is out here running the cover 3, running the cover 2, the primary purpose of those looks on defense is to really avoid getting beat over the top, okay? It's to keep everything in front of you and avoid those big plays. Yet this year, so often, we did allow those big plays. I mean, how many times did we get beat this year deep? Well, here's the stat that that explains it all. I don't even know what I was trying to say, okay? The Colts, oh, goodness, a blunder. The Colts were second in the league in explosive plays allowed, okay? So if Gus is out here calling plays to prevent those explosive deep shots, yet we are out here allowing them anyway. Do you see where now the idea that this is all Gus Bradley's fault and it's all his scheme and it's all his play calling starts to just have a few holes in it? I'm not saying it's completely baseless, but do you see where this perfect idea that you had where everything would just be fixed if the Colts didn't have Gus Bradley and he would just change what he was doing? Do you see how the idea that is just a Band-Aid to fix all kind of starts to, not look as clear, right? Because it's actually this distinction right here, right now, that I'm making, this is where I think the truth lies. I think it's in the distinction I'm making right here. Because again, I said I saw a defense that had good moments, and I saw a defense that had good talent, but I saw an inconsistent defense, and I saw one that oftentimes had miscommunications in the secondary. I don't think it was a play calling issue primarily. I think we had a busted coverage issue on the defensive side of the ball. Now, this inconsistency or inconsistency anywhere in life is going to come from a few places, right? A lack of preparation, a lack of focus, and a lack of experience. It's going to be one, two, three, or all three of those things. Any one of them or all of them. Now, with the absolute detail-oriented competitive psychopath with the huge fucking brain that is our coach Shane Steichen, and his clear support of Gus Bradley as defensive coordinator of this team, I am inclined to believe it was not a lack of preparation, because I just get that Shane Steichen gives me the vibe that if it was a lack of preparation, Gus Bradley wouldn't have a job anymore. That's kind of just the vibe I get from the way things are running with Shane Steichen as the head coach. I'm more inclined to believe it was the latter of those three things, that it was a lack of experience in the secondary that led to some of what we saw. And perhaps that occasional lack of, or rather that lack of experience led to an occasional lack of focus, right? Which again, explosive plays. The Colts were second in explosive plays allowed. Now, technically, not every explosive play is a deep shot, but generally speaking, if there was an explosive play, it was a throw down the field. That's just kind of how it goes in the NFL, okay? Now, yes, we can use some help at safety, right? Of course we can. But you look at the secondary in its entirety, and my question to you is, who exactly don't you like here? Okay. Now I know there's some contracts, right? Because obviously we have the Julian Blackman contract we got to worry about, and Kenny Moore's contract we got to worry about. But as it currently stands, for the sake of this, I want to talk about what we had this year and assume we have it next year, because it's kind of my point, right? Kenny Moore in the slot, Jalen Jones and Juju Brents on the outside. Of course, Juju Brents was not playing for much of the season, but those three corners as your starters, and then Nick Cross, Ronnie Harrison Jr., Rodney Thomas, and Julian Blackman is kind of those safeties, okay? Really, Julian Blackman and Nick Cross as the safeties I think it should be come next season if we were to have all those things and we didn't sign anyone else that was better or bring in anyone else that was better. Do you dislike any of the players I just said in terms of them being guys who are like consistently out there on the field for the Indianapolis Colts? And that's kind of where my confusion is. That's why I say that it is clear that the Colts have to improve the defense, but not clear what they have to improve on defense. This is the type of stuff I'm talking about, right? Now, you look at these guys, most of them are under the age of 24 or first-year starters or rookies or perhaps all of the above, right? Again, that's kind of the situation we were in experience. But I bring this up and I keep hammering the point home of inexperience because when people talk about the 15th pick in the draft, they talk about one of two things. One, trading up for Marvin Harrison Jr. That's not going to fucking happen, okay? But the more realistic of the folk will talk about drafting a corner at 15. Given everything I just laid out right there for you, are you sure that drafting a corner with that pick would fix the issues that we have? There's nothing else at all that you would like to have with that 15th pick? Are you sure that whoever we drafted that 15th pick is going to come out day one and perform better than Jalen Jones, who was a stud, and Juju Brents, who hopefully, if he could stay healthy for an offseason, I thought when he was on the field, he was very impressive. Again, a few moments, a young guy, and kind of had a lack of reps. But are you sure that at the 15th pick, corner's what's going to do it, right? I'm not taking a side. Again, I'm all about furthering the discussion over here. Just food for thought, right? Furthering the discussion. But I will say this, while not taking a side, but also kind of taking a side. As Shane Steichen says, and as I've always said on this show, and you could all fact check me on this one, go ahead and watch them all. Watch, like, comment on them all. Continuity is very, very important, right? I always give the analogy of the Christmas lights, the cliche of, oh, Christmas light, one goes out, none of them work, okay? Continuity in a unit is huge because if one guy is not getting the job done, this actually, by the way, I'm over here bringing up an analogy. This does not have anything to do with it. The point of the analogy of the Christmas light is if one guy's not doing their job, it has a ripple effect, so that's wrong. What I'm saying is continuity is important because the communication is important and being on the same page is important. There was one year that the Pittsburgh Steelers were a horrific offensive line, like the worst. And I say this as someone who knows a Steelers fan. And going into that offseason, they did basically nothing to address it. They had like injuries on the offensive line throughout the course of the season. And the only changes that were made to that offensive line going into next season were essentially just the fact that they were healthy and everyone was playing their natural positions. And while they didn't end up having a top-tier line in the NFL next season, it ended up being like an average to above-average offensive line, just off continuity alone. We saw this with the Colts offensive line last year going into this season, where in the second half of the year, that group with Will Fries, who everyone was starting to hate on, they really kind of had a better year once Jeff Saturday came in, the offensive lineman himself, but it was continuity up front that ultimately resulted in all of the results we see this year. So for me, I look at the secondary, and of course we need to add competition, and of course we need to add talent. I'm not disputing that. But in terms of adding like blockbuster top-end talent to this secondary, are we sure that's what we need to do? Or is it just a matter of them getting more reps in the NFL, getting more reps together, and then making sure that if one guy gets hurt, we're not trotting out fucking Tony Brown, right? Is that what we have to do? Is it not so much about going out there and getting not literally Sauce Gardner? You get my point, though. Getting someone that we think is a star. How do we know that Kenny Moore, Juju Brents, and Jalen Jones, with a full offseason, healthy, going into a season, isn't good enough in the secondary as a starting three? To be honest, I'd like to believe that there's a few teams in the league that wouldn't even mind having that situation at defensive back. I might be wrong. But I'm just saying, I mean, I just wanted to throw some of these thoughts out there before we headed into the weekend. It's going to be a slow burn this offseason, baby. Some of you guys are asking me to talk about free agents, this, that, and the next. If I talk about all that stuff right now, there's going to be nothing to talk about in a few weeks, all right? I know what I'm doing over here, people, all right? I'm taking it slow as we talk about this offseason content. I want to make sure that I'm with you guys every single week discussing some of the nuances of this stuff, or at least what I believe to be the nuances. I don't mean to sound pretentious, right? But yeah, I mean, that was the episode. I work 17 hours tomorrow, and then I'm headed to see Mark Normand at the Beacon Theater on Saturday night on the 27th, right? That's the duality of being a New Yorker. You got to work 17-hour days, but then you get to go to the city. All the shows are over there, okay? So it is what it is. Point in bringing that up is that I hope to have one out for you guys Sunday morning, the next episode. But if not, because of those 2 very busy days, Monday morning will be the move. But until then, that was the episode. My name is Justin. This right here was the Ride on the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, go Colts.